This is take number 2 on Friedrich Nietzsche. No philosopher has been more intensely concerned with questions of value than Nietzsche was. His early works deal mainly with such questions, raised for him by both ancient and modern cultural developments from the Greeks to Wagner. His masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, revolves around evaluative concerns, as do most of his later works.
All the sciences have, from now on, to prepare the way for the future task of philosophers. This task is the solution of the problem of value, the determination of the order of rank among values.
The problem of value became central to Nietzsche's thinking because his basic aim was to overcome nihilism. The ominous possibility that all values might be repudiated and devalued compelled him to take up this problem.
The world does not have the value we thought it had. Initial result, it seems worth less. That is how it is experienced initially. It is only in this sense that we are pessimists. That is in our determination to admit this revaluation to ourselves without any reservation, and to stop telling ourselves tales, lies, the old way. That is precisely how we find the pathos that impels us to seek new values. In sum, the world might be far more valuable than we used to believe. We must see through the naivete of our ideals. And while we thought that we accorded it the highest interpretation, we may not even have given our human existence a moderately fair value.
Seeking new values thus became Nietzsche's most pressing challenge, and with it a related task he calls the revaluation of values. Nietzsche knew that nihilism is the likely consequence of the death of God, but nihilism for him is only a transitional stage to a new way of thinking that goes beyond nihilism. Interpreting the world and life in terms of will to power, Nietzsche proposes a new concept and standard of value, a standard that may be used to carry out the revaluation of values, and points the way to the creation of new values. Nietzsche calls his standard a Dionysian value standard for existence, using the name of the Greek god Dionysus. The Greeks had associated Dionysus with the idea that life is inexhaustibly creative, yet inevitably destructive. So Nietzsche uses the name Dionysus to affirm this life in this world, celebrating it for what it is rather than condemning it for what it's not. In contrast to Schopenhauer's pessimism and nihilism, Nietzsche says,
I want to cross over to the opposite, to a Dionysian affirmation of the world as it is.
In his revaluation of values, Nietzsche attempts to reassess those things we commonly suppose to be of greatest value. Here he expresses a new demand. We must question received opinions about the things we hold most dear. In his words, the value of these values themselves must be called into question. We must ask, what value do they themselves possess?
The inquiry into the origin of our evaluations and tables of the good is in absolutely no way identical with a critique of them, as is so often believed, even though the insight into some shameful origin certainly brings with it a feeling of a diminution in value of the thing that originated thus, and prepares the way to a critical mood and attitude toward it. What are our evaluations and moral tables really worth? What is the outcome of their rule? For whom? In relation to what? Answer: for life. But what is life? Here we need a new, more definite formulation of the concept, life. My formula for it is, life is will to power.
Nietzsche says life may be both comprehended and justified in terms of this will to power.
Life is a unique case. One must justify all existence, and not only life. The justifying principle is one that explains life too. Life is only a means to something. It is the expression of forms, of the growth of power.
For Nietzsche, value and valuation are intimately connected with the will to power.
All purposes, aims, meaning, are only modes of expression and metamorphoses of one will that is inherent in all events, the will to power. All valuations are only consequences and narrow perspectives in the service of this one will. Valuation itself is only this will to power.
In describing his gospel of the future, Nietzsche employs the double title, The Will to Power, Attempt at a Revaluation of Values. This sums up his response to nihilism. The revaluation of values is his task, and will to power is the principle he'll use. All life for Nietzsche is will to power in various forms. Nothing transcends life, so Nietzsche concludes that value must be value for life, and value can be understood only in terms of what life essentially involves. The sole objective criterion of value recognizes only quanta of enhanced and organized power.
What is the objective measure of value? Solely the quantum of enhanced and organized power. Assuming that life itself is the will to power, there is nothing to life that has value except the degree of power.
But Nietzsche gets a great deal of mileage out of the deceptively simple notion of degree of power. He associates enhanced and organized power with growth and development. So the enhancement of life involves both heightened vitality and greater cultivation and creativity. For Nietzsche, the value of something depends on whether it's life-promoting, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps even species-cultivating. He emphasizes overcoming as opposed to mere enduring. Zarathustra says,
"And life itself confided this secret to me. Behold, it said, I am that which must always overcome itself."
Nietzsche conceives value along both naturalistic and artistic lines. Each way of thinking brings out an important and fundamental aspect of his concept of value. On the naturalistic side, Nietzsche writes,
The attempt should be made to see whether a scientific order of values could be constructed simply on a numerical and mensural scale of force. All other values are prejudices, naivetés, misunderstandings. They are everywhere reducible to this numerical and mensural scale of force. The ascent on this scale represents every rise in value. The descent on this scale represents diminution in value.
Yet Nietzsche also thinks qualitative considerations are important. He constantly emphasizes organization, refinement, and enhancement. So he says that he advocates an anti-metaphysical view of the world, yes, but an artistic one. Nietzsche also speaks of the world as a work of art that gives birth to itself. This reflects his disdain for any merely quantitative or scientific interpretation of the world. Such an interpretation for him would be shallow and blind to what matters in it, just as a purely scientific estimation of music would be. Quality depends crucially upon quantity, but it's not identical with it. Philosophers and others have traditionally supposed consciousness to be supremely and intrinsically valuable. But Nietzsche writes,
In relation to the vastness and multiplicity of the life of every organism, the conscious world of feelings, intentions, and valuations is a small section. We have no right whatever to posit this piece of consciousness as the aim and purpose of this total phenomenon of life. Becoming conscious is obviously only one more means towards the unfolding and extension of the power of life. Therefore, it is a piece of naivete to posit pleasure or spirituality, or morality, or any other particular of the sphere of consciousness as the highest value, and perhaps even to justify the world by means of this. This is my basic objection to all wherefores and highest values in philosophy and theology hitherto. One kind of means has been misunderstood as an end. Conversely, life and the enhancement of its power has been debased to a means. The fundamental mistake is simply that instead of understanding consciousness as a tool and particular aspect of the total life, we posit it as the standard of value, and take it to be the condition of life that is of supreme value.
Nietzsche extends his revaluation of values to all three elements of philosophy's celebrated trinity of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Beauty, truth, and goodness have long been considered the highest values, possessing intrinsic worth apart from their relation to life. But Nietzsche suggests a different assessment.
Art, knowledge, morality are means. Instead of recognizing in them the aim of enhancing life, one has associated them with the antithesis of life, with God, also as the revelation of a higher world, which here and there looks down upon us through them.
Nietzsche also revalues a number of things that have long been regarded negatively.
For all the values that the true, the truthful, and the selfless may deserve, it would still be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life might have to be ascribed to deception, selfishness, and lust.
Traits like selfishness and lust may be harmful if they're uncontrolled, but Nietzsche believes they're fundamental to life. All creativity, all enhancements of life occur only when basic drives are sublimated and so expressed. So they have a far greater value than is commonly supposed. Transfiguration, involving an abundance of energy creatively sublimated, is the key. Nietzsche contends that the overman is the meaning of the earth, and he says that the emergence of the full, rich, great, whole human being can justify the existence of whole millennia. He looks to this type of man to justify life, even at its most terrible, ambiguous, and mendacious. Nietzsche's image of the overman represents life transformed beyond the level of robust but brutish animality, also beyond ordinary humanity. He believes those exceptional human beings who achieve this transformed existence have a great and special value. The key to their value is neither knowledge nor morality, neither health nor strength. What matters most about them, for Nietzsche, is their creativity. So Zarathustra proclaims,
Creation. That is the great redemption from suffering and life's growing light. Thus are you advocates and justifiers of all impermanence, willing no more, and esteeming no more, and creating no more. Oh, that this great weariness might always remain far from me.
Creating, for Nietzsche, is intimately related to both willing and esteeming. These are all aspects of the same process through which life transforms and enhances itself. We endow human existence with value through our value creations. Life's value itself is created, but it's no mere illusion. Life's value is as real as this higher humanity itself may come to be. For Nietzsche, endowing life and the world with value is the highest of all forms of will to power. It doesn't matter that particular value creations, like particular lives, pass away almost as soon as they make their appearance. It's enough that they come to be and that they always will. Human life differs in many important respects from other forms of life. Yet Nietzsche never tires of saying that we're fundamentally a species of animal, and that we belong to this world of nature. Human life is no longer merely animal only because it's developed in a unique way. Nietzsche expresses this recurring theme in one of his earliest essays.
When one speaks of humanity, the idea is fundamental that this is something which separates and distinguishes man from nature. In reality, however, there is no such separation. Natural qualities and those called truly human are inseparably grown together. Man, even in his highest and noblest capacities, is wholly nature. Those of his abilities which are terrifying and considered inhuman may even be the fertile soil out of which alone all humanity can grow in impulse, deed, and work.
Nietzsche dismisses what he calls the verbal pomp and beautiful, glittering, jingling, festive words that religious and philosophical thinkers have long used to characterize our human nature.
To translate man back into nature. To become master over the many vain and overly enthusiastic interpretations and connotations that have so far been scrawled and painted over that eternal basic text of Homo Natura. To see to it that man henceforth stands before man, as even today, hardened in the discipline of science, he stands before the rest of nature. Deaf to the siren songs of old metaphysical bird-catchers who have been piping at him all too long. You are more. You are higher. You are of a different origin. That may be a strange and insane task, but it is a task. Who would deny that?
Nietzsche undertakes this task not because he wants us to think badly of ourselves, but rather because he wants our appreciation of our humanity to be free from error, illusion, and mere wishful thinking.
We have learned differently. We have become more modest in every way. We no longer derive man from the spirit or the deity. We have placed him back among the animals. We consider him the strongest animal because he is the most cunning. His spirituality is a consequence of this. On the other hand, we oppose the vanity that would raise its head again here too, as if man had been the great hidden purpose of the evolution of the animals. Man is by no means the crown of creation. Every living being stands beside him on the same level of perfection. The pure spirit is a pure stupidity. If we subtract the nervous system and the senses, the mortal shroud, then we miscalculate. That is all.
Nietzsche argues that previous thinkers have wrongly described the human mind or spirit as something entirely separate from the body. So Zarathustra says,
Body am I, and soul. Thus speaks the child. But the awakened and knowing say, Body am I entirely, and nothing else. And soul is only a word for something about the body. An instrument of your body is also your little reason, my brother, which you call spirit. The creative body created the spirit as a hand for its will.
Nietzsche expresses the same point more plainly and directly when he writes,
Through the long succession of millennia, man has not known himself physiologically. He does not know himself even today. To know, for example, that one has a nervous system but no soul is still the privilege of the best informed.
Nietzsche suggests that this common mistake has often been combined by philosophers with another error in the understanding of our nature.
All philosophers have the common failing of starting out from man as he is now, and thinking they can reach their goal through an analysis of him. They involuntarily think of man as an eternal truth, as something that remains constant in the midst of all flux, as a sure measure of things. Lack of historical sense is the family failing of all philosophers. Many, without being aware of it, even take the most recent manifestation of man, such as has arisen under the influence of certain religions, and even certain political events, as the fixed form from which one has to start out. They do not recognize that man has become, and that the faculty of cognition has become. Everything essential in the development of mankind took place in primeval times, long before the 4,000 years we more or less know about. During these years, mankind may well not have altered very much, but everything has become. There are no eternal facts, just as there are no absolute truths. Consequently, what is needed from now on is historical philosophizing, and with it the virtue of modesty.
Nietzsche proposes to remedy these defects by reinterpreting our human nature in entirely naturalistic terms. He wants to dispel the idea that we were created by God in his image, and to draw attention instead to the conditions in which human life is actually developed.
Tremendous self-examination is needed. Becoming conscious of oneself, not as individuals, but as mankind. Let us reflect. Let us think back. Let us follow the highways and byways.
Nietzsche by no means thinks we can explain and understand everything about human life in purely biological, evolutionary, and physiological terms. He remarks that the body is a more astonishing idea than the old soul. The complex functions of our bodies are no longer merely biological phenomena. The human animal has been profoundly transformed as our spiritual life has emerged in a broad range of activities.
It is the history of the development of a higher body that emerges into our sensibility. The organic is rising to yet higher levels.
Nietzsche suggests that our humanity ironically reflects many things that have gone wrong as it developed, but he doesn't want us to try to correct them in order somehow to return to mere healthy animality. Even if this were possible, it would eliminate everything that makes us human and would prevent us from going on to attain any higher humanity. Nietzsche characterizes man as the most endangered animal, and as the sickliest and most bungled of all the animals. But the loss of healthy animality set the stage for what he calls the entire evolution of the spirit. This leads him to ask,
where does it come from, this sickliness? For man is more sick, uncertain, changeable, indeterminate than any other animal. There is no doubt of that. He is the sick animal. How has that come about? Certainly he has also dared more, done more new things, braved more, and challenged far more than all the other animals put together. He, the great experimenter with himself, discontented and insatiable, wrestling with animals, nature, and gods for ultimate dominion. How should such a courageous and richly endowed animal not also be the most imperiled, the most chronically and profoundly sick of all sick animals?
Nature's making a unique experiment in us, and the outcome is still in doubt. Our social and conscious life is an alternative to the instincts that operate in other forms of life. Social conditions have broken down our former instinct structure in order to replace it. That's what Nietzsche means when he calls us sick in relation to the natural state of healthy animality. Both consciousness and the bad conscience are results of this pathology.
Man was bound to contract this illness under the stress of the most fundamental change he ever experienced. That change which occurred when he found himself finally enclosed within the walls of society and of peace. The situations that faced sea animals when they were compelled to become land animals or perish was the same as that which faced these semi-animals, well adapted to the wilderness, to war, to prowling, to adventure. Suddenly, all their instincts were disvalued and suspended. In this new world, they no longer possessed their former guides, their regulating, unconscious and infallible drives. They were reduced to thinking, inferring, reckoning, coordinating cause and effect, these unfortunate creatures. They were reduced to their consciousness, their weakest and most fallible organ.
Nietzsche says our consciousness, along with our powers of thought and expression, emerged under these conditions. But another development also set the stage for our present humanity and its possible further enhancement.
At the same time, the old instincts had not suddenly ceased to make their usual demands. Only it was hardly or rarely possible to humor them. As a rule, they had to seek new and, as it were, subterranean gratifications. All instincts that do not discharge themselves outwardly turn inward. This is what I call the internalization of man. Thus it was that man first developed what was later called his soul. The entire inner world, originally as thin as if it were stretched between two membranes, expanded and extended itself, acquired depth, breadth, and height, in the same measure as outward discharge was inhibited. Those fearful bulwarks with which the political organization protected itself against the old instincts of freedom, and punishments belong among these bulwarks, brought about that all those instincts of wild, free, prowling man turned backward against man himself. Thus began the gravest and uncanniest illness, from which humanity has not yet recovered. Man's suffering of man, of himself, the result of a forcible sundering from his animal past, as it were a leap and plunge into new surroundings and conditions of existence, a declaration of war against the old instincts, upon which his strength, joy, and terribleness had rested hitherto.
Nietzsche believes this traumatic development involved a dangerous departure from the condition of healthy animality, but it also resulted in a most remarkable, promising turn of events.
Let us add at once that, on the other hand, the existence on earth of an animal soul turned against itself, taking sides against itself, was something so new, profound, unheard of, enigmatic, contradictory, and pregnant with a future, that the aspect of the earth was essentially altered. From now on, man is included among the most unexpected and exciting lucky throws in the dice game. He gives rise to an interest, a tension, a hope, almost a certainty, as if with him something were announcing and preparing itself, as if man were not a goal, but only a way, an episode, a bridge, a great promise.
So human life was transformed from something merely animal into something more than that. It acquired psychological as well as physiological and social dimensions. In trying to do justice to this fact, Nietzsche rejects the traditional concept of the soul and then reintroduces it in a suitably revised way.
One must first of all give the finishing stroke to that calamitous atomism which Christianity has taught best and longest, the soul atomism. The belief which regards the soul as something indestructible, eternal, indivisible. This belief ought to be expelled from science. But the way is open for new versions and refinements of the soul hypothesis, and such conceptions as mortal soul and soul as subjective multiplicity and soul as social structure of the drives and affects want henceforth to have citizens' rights in science.
Nietzsche attends closely to the many aspects of human experience that are commonly attributed to the soul or mind. He says it's wrong to think of the things we call reason, will, consciousness, and self-consciousness as the activities of a purely spiritual entity. They are real, but they actually originate in our mundane biological and social existence. For example, he argues that consciousness is rooted in our social existence and practical needs. It's not an original capacity of the individual human mind.
It seems to me as if the subtlety and strength of consciousness always were proportionate to the capacity for communication, and as if this capacity in turn were proportionate to the need for communication, at least when we consider whole races and chains of generations. Consciousness is really only a net of communication between human beings. It is only as such that it had to develop. A solitary human being who lived like a beast of prey would not have needed it. As the most endangered animal, he needed help and protection. He needed his peers. He had to learn to express his distress and to make himself understood. And for all this, he needed consciousness first of all. Only this conscious thinking takes the form of words, which is to say, signs of communication. And this fact uncovers the origin of consciousness. In brief, the development of language and of consciousness go hand in hand. The emergence of our sense impressions into our own consciousness, the ability to fix them, and, as it were, exhibit them externally, increased proportionately with the need to communicate them to others by means of signs. The human being inventing signs is at the same time the human being who becomes ever more keenly conscious of himself. It was only as a social animal that man acquired self-consciousness, which he is still in the process of doing more and more.
Nietzsche says our personal identity also originated socially. He thinks personal identity is fundamentally a fiction, but because society makes us regard ourselves as beings with persisting identities, by holding us responsible for our conduct through time, we cease to be mere creatures of the moment. We actually become such selves, at least in a functional sense. So Nietzsche contends that with the aid of the social straitjacket, man was actually made calculable in order to be fit for society. But this isn't the end of the story. Imposing personal identities on human beings has set the stage for a further development that transcends this social result. At the end of what he calls this tremendous process, Nietzsche says that a higher type of human being becomes possible, a sovereign individual who is like only to himself, liberated again from the morality of custom, autonomous and supramoral. This exemplifies what Nietzsche means by the enhancement of life. It also prepares the way for further enhancements through which an even higher humanity may emerge. Nietzsche's higher humanity also involves higher spirituality, and higher spirituality involves sublimating our basic drives, bringing them under control and expressing them in more refined and creative ways. Our basic drives are often brutal and destructive in their original forms, but Nietzsche insists that they're the basis of all higher spirituality and culture. So he has Zarathustra say,
"Once you suffered passions and called them evil, but now you have only your virtues left. They grew out of your passions. Once you had wild dogs in your cellar, but in the end they turned into birds and lovely singers. Out of your poisons you brewed your balsam, and nothing evil grows out of you henceforth, unless it be the evil that grows out of the fight among your virtues.
Nietzsche says culture demands that we sublimate our natural drives in this way. This, for him, is the key to the further enhancement of human life.
The greater and more terrible the passions are that an age, a people, an individual can permit themselves as means, the higher stands their culture.
As Nietzsche contemplates our humanity, he finds much that's still partly animal, much that's all too human, and much that's symptomatic of sickness and weakness. Yet there is more to our humanity than this, holding great promise. As Nietzsche's Zarathustra tells us,
man is a rope, tied between beast and overman. A rope over an abyss, a dangerous across, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous shuddering and stopping.
our development has been slow, difficult, and uneven, accompanied by much suffering. But Nietzsche says suffering's also contributed to the further development of our humanity.
The discipline of suffering, of great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far? That tension of the soul in unhappiness which cultivates its strength, and whatever has been attained of profundity, secret, mask, spirit, cunning, greatness, was it not gained through suffering, through the discipline of great suffering? In man, creature and creator are united. In man there is material, fragment, excess, clay, dirt, nonsense, chaos. But in man there is also creator, form giver, hammer hardness, spectator divinity, and seventh day. Do you understand this contrast?
Humanity is a mixed picture. We differ significantly in accomplishments, strength, and potential of all kinds. Nietzsche holds that a kind of equality among human beings is possible, but only at the cost of suppressing these differences and confining potentially exceptional individuals to mediocrity. Some people have creative abilities others lack. If they develop these abilities, Nietzsche argues that they deserve to be considered superior to others. So he sees an order of rank among human beings that reflects their qualitative differences. Zarathustra says,
"Thus blinks the mob. There are no higher men. We are all equal. Man is man. Before God, we are all equal." Before God. But now this God has died. And before the mob, we do not want to be equal.
People who believe in human equality often rely on the religious concept that all men are equal before God. This idea may also linger on among non-believers, but for Nietzsche it's only a fading echo of a dying old faith. Most people are unwilling to face and accept the consequences of abandoning this faith. If Nietzsche is right in saying that the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, then we have to take human differences seriously. For him, the idea that everyone has an immortal soul and so has equal rank with everyone else is a superstition so impertinent that it cannot be branded with too much contempt. Nietzsche contrasts ascending life with a life of decay, disintegration, weakness. He has no doubt about the relative rank of these two types. Most people occupy what he calls the human lowlands, while a very few stand out as a higher, brighter humanity, far above the rest.
Mankind as a whole does not represent a development towards something better or stronger or higher in the sense accepted today. Progress is merely a modern idea. That is, a false idea. In another sense, success in individual cases is constantly encountered in the most widely different places and cultures. Here, we really do find a higher type, which is, in relation to mankind as a whole, a kind of overman. Such fortunate accidents of great success have always been possible, and will perhaps always be possible.
Nietzsche has a low opinion of those who are average, mediocre, and uncreative, calling them mere herd animals. This type of person prevails both socially and ideologically in the modern world.
Men not noble enough to see the abysmally different order of rank and chasm of rank between man and man. Such men have so far held sway over the fate of Europe with their equal before God, until finally a smaller, almost ridiculous type, a herd animal, something eager to please, sickly and mediocre, has been bred, the European of today.
This prevailing mediocrity distresses Nietzsche, because it stifles any higher type of humanity. The enhancement of life requires the creative efforts of people with exceptional powers. They must be strong enough at least to be capable of harming others. Otherwise they will lack the strength to create.
The desirability of the mediocre is what we combat. The ideal, conceived as something in which nothing harmful, evil, dangerous, questionable, destructive would remain. What is it I protest against? That one should take this petty, peaceable mediocrity, this equilibrium of a soul that knows nothing of the mighty motivation of great accumulations of strength, for something exalted, possibly even for the measure of man.
Nietzsche attempts to launch a counter-movement against those who promote mediocrity. He champions what he calls a luxury surplus of mankind.
This would be a higher type that arises and preserves itself under different conditions from those of the average man. My concept, my metaphor for this type, is the word overman.
This is the end of side one. Please fast forward and turn over your cassette.